My son wrote, "Don't wait for us for dinner. We're going to my wife's family. They're more important to us." I just smiled and canceled all the checks. In the morning, he was standing at my doorstep. "Good day, dear listeners. It's Louisa again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think I knew what loneliness felt like. I was wrong. Real loneliness isn't sitting alone in an empty house. It's sitting in a house full of memories, looking at photographs of people who've forgotten you exist. For 3 years after Harold passed, I'd built a quiet life. Garden in the morning, book club on Wednesdays, volunteering at the library on Fridays. Nothing spectacular, but it was mine. My son Daniel called every Sunday. Sometimes his wife Rebecca joined. They had 2 kids, Emma, 7, and little Jack, 4, my grandchildren. The reason I kept Harold's life insurance money carefully invested instead of spending it on cruises or a condo in Florida. But something had shifted in the past 6 months. The Sunday calls became shorter, then sporadic. Daniel's voice carried a distraction I couldn't name. "Sorry, Mom, Rebecca needs me," became his standard goodbye. When I did see them, Rebecca's smile never reached her eyes. She'd scroll through her phone while I talked, occasionally looking up with that practiced expression of polite tolerance. I told myself I was imagining things, being oversensitive. Harold always said I read too much into people's tones. The first real warning came in September. I'd offered to take Emma and Jack for the weekend, something I used to do monthly. Rebecca responded via text, "That won't work with our schedule." No explanation. No alternative suggested. Just a door closed. When I mentioned it to Daniel, he'd sighed. "Mom, Rebecca's under a lot of stress. Her mother helps out more because she lives closer." The implications stung. I wasn't needed. Still, I tried. I sent birthday checks, generous ones. I bought Christmas gifts in October, carefully chosen for each child's interests. I offered to help with after-school pickups. Every offer met the same polite wall of, "We've got it handled." Then came Thanksgiving. I'd spent 2 days preparing Harold's mother's recipes. Turkey with herb butter, cornbread stuffing, sweet potato casserole with the pecan topping. Daniel loved as a boy. The table was set for 6. I'd even bought a booster seat for Jack. At 3 p.m., my phone buzzed. The text was from Daniel. "Don't wait up for us for dinner. We're going to Rebecca's family. They matter more to us." I read it 3 times. Each word felt like a slap. Not, "We're sorry." Not, "Something came up." Just a casual announcement that I ranked below Rebecca's family, that I didn't matter. The exclamation point seemed almost cruel, like he was excited to dismiss me. My hands trembled as I stared at that message. How had I raised a man who could write those words to his mother? When had I become so disposable? But as I sat there in my silent dining room, with steam still rising from dishes no one would eat, something else crept in beneath the hurt. Clarity. Cold, sharp clarity. Because that text confirmed what I'd been trying not to see. This wasn't about busy schedules or Rebecca's stress. This was calculated dismissal, and it had been building for months. I thought about the checks I'd written, the loans Daniel had asked for. $3,000 for car repairs in July, $5,000 for unexpected medical bills in August, $2,500 for Emma's school expenses just last month. He'd promised to pay me back, but there'd been no mention of repayment. No thank you even. Just more requests. I opened my banking app with shaking fingers. Transaction history. 6 months of deposits into Daniel's account. My breath caught. $24,700. Nearly $25,000 I'd given them while they stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped pretending I mattered. The turkey was getting cold. I looked at it, at all of it, and something inside me hardened. I pulled up my bank's website and navigated to bill pay. Every month, I had automatic payments set up for their benefits. Daniel's car insurance, $340 per month. The kids' educational savings accounts, $500 per month each. Their gym membership, $120 per month. Even their Netflix and streaming services, $65 per month. Little things. Things I'd offered to help with after Harold died, when I told Daniel I wanted to ease their burden. Turns out I was just convenient. I clicked through each automatic payment. One by one, I canceled them. Then I stopped the scheduled deposits. All of it. Gone. My phone stayed silent that evening. No apology. No, we're thinking of you. Nothing. When I finally went to bed at midnight, I didn't cry. I lay awake, thinking about that text, about the money, about my grandbabies who barely knew me anymore. And I began to plan. Morning came too early, but I was already awake when the sun rose. I'd spent most of the night sitting at Harold's old desk, surrounded by bank statements and printouts. Under the lamplight, the numbers told a story I'd been too trusting to read. The $24,700 in direct transfers was just the beginning. When I added the automatic payments I'd been covering for 18 months, the total climbed to $38,940, nearly $40,000. Harold's life insurance money, the nest egg he'd worked 30 years to build, slowly drained away by a son who couldn't even spare me a decent Thanksgiving. My hands shook as I wrote it all down in Harold's old ledger. I needed to see it in ink, make it real. Each entry felt like waking from a dream I'd mistaken for love. Car insurance, $6,120. Educational accounts, $18,000, the gym membership they'd specifically asked me to cover, because staying healthy means being better parents. That stung particularly sharp now. But the real gut punch came when I found the folder I'd labeled Emma and Jack's Future. Inside were the bonds I'd been buying quarterly. $2,000 every 3 months for both children since they were born. For Emma, that meant $56,000. For Jack, $32,000. Money I'd planned to give them at 18 to help with college or their first car or whatever dreams they'd chase. What would Daniel and Rebecca do with that money if something happened to me? Would they even tell the children it came from a grandmother they barely remembered? Fear crept in then. Not the sharp terror of immediate danger, but something deeper. The fear of dying irrelevant, of being erased from my grandchildren's lives while I was still breathing. What if I did nothing? What if I just accepted this new reality where I paid for the privilege of being forgotten? No, absolutely not. I made coffee, strong, black, the way Harold used to make it when he faced difficult decisions at the factory. I sat at the kitchen table and forced myself to think clearly. Emotion wouldn't help me now. I needed strategy. The first question: why had this happened? Daniel wasn't raised to be cruel. I'd taught him better than this, which meant Rebecca was either influencing him or he'd changed in ways I'd refused to see. Either way, they'd learned they could take from me without consequence. Every time I'd said yes, I'd trained them to expect more. That ended now. The second question: what did I actually want? Not revenge. That word felt too hot, too unstable. I wanted recognition, respect. I wanted my son to remember I was his mother, not an ATM machine. And I wanted my grandchildren to know me before it was too late. The third question: what could I actually do? I wasn't a lawyer or a confrontational person by nature. Harold had always been the one to handle conflicts, but I had something they clearly wanted: money. And I had something they didn't expect: documentation. Every check, every transfer, every text message asking for help. I'd kept it all, organized in folders, because that's what you do when you run a household for 43 years. A plan began forming. First, I needed information. Real information, not the sanitized version Daniel fed me on those rare phone calls. Where was my money actually going? Were they in genuine trouble, or had I become a convenient source of extra income? I thought about the new SUV I'd seen in their driveway 3 months ago, the photos Rebecca posted on Facebook of their weekend at some beach resort, Daniel's casual mention of joining a country club. None of that suggested financial hardship. I opened my laptop. Harold had insisted I learn computers before he died, so you won't be helpless, and created a new folder: documentation. Inside, I began organizing everything. Bank statements highlighted, text messages screenshotted. I even found the original emails where Daniel had promised the loans were temporary. "Just until we get back on our feet, Mom, we'll pay you back." Empty words, as it turned out. By noon, I had 6 months of evidence compiled. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about a pattern of taking advantage of someone they'd decided was too old, too lonely, too desperate for connection to say no. They'd miscalculated. I picked up my phone and searched for family law attorneys in my area. My finger hovered over the first name. Was I really doing this? Taking legal action against my own son? Then I remembered that text. "They matter more to us." I pressed dial. The law office of Patricia Morrison occupied the second floor of a brick building downtown, above a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and ambition. I arrived 15 minutes early on Monday morning, my folder of documentation clutched against my chest like armor. Patricia Morrison was younger than I expected, maybe 50, with silver streaks in her dark hair and eyes that looked like they'd heard every family story imaginable. She offered me tea. I accepted, grateful for something to do with my shaking hands. "Mrs. Patterson," she began, scanning the documents I'd spread across her desk. "Walk me through what brought you here." I told her everything: the cooling relationship, the text message, the money, all of it. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in precise handwriting. When I finished, she sat back. "Do you have written agreements for these loans?" "Just text messages where Daniel asked for help. He called them loans, but nothing formal." "And the automatic payments? Did they request these, or did you offer?" I swallowed. I offered. After my husband died, I wanted to help ease their burden. Patricia nodded slowly. "Mrs. Patterson, I'll be direct. Legally, gifts are gifts. Unless your son explicitly promised repayment in writing, recovering that money would be extremely difficult. But," she held up a hand as my heart sank, "that doesn't mean you're powerless. What you can do is stop the flow immediately and protect your assets going forward." "You've already canceled the automatic payments?" "Yes. Thanksgiving night." "Good. That's your right. Now, have you considered updating your will and estate documents?" The question hit me like cold water. My will. I'd made it 2 years ago, splitting everything evenly between Daniel and my daughter, Catherine. But Catherine lived in Oregon, called every week, visited every few months with her husband and their daughter. She'd never asked me for a dime. "I think I need to make some changes," I said quietly. Patricia pulled out fresh paperwork. "Let's talk about what you want your legacy to actually look like." We spent 2 hours there. By the time I left, I had an appointment scheduled for the following week to draft a new will. Patricia had also given me something else: the name of a forensic accountant. "If you're serious about understanding where your money went," she'd said, David Chen is the best. He can track everything. I called David from my car. His voice was warm but professional. I can definitely help, Mrs. Patterson. I'll need access to their financial records, which they'll have to provide if there's a legal request, but we can start with your records to establish the pattern of transfers. How long will it take? For a preliminary analysis, about 2 weeks. I'll show you exactly where your money went. I hung up, feeling something I hadn't felt in months: control. But when I got home, there were 7 missed calls from Daniel. My stomach dropped. They knew. Somehow, they already knew. The first voicemail was confused. Mom, hey, weird question. Did something happen with your bank? Our car insurance payment bounced. The second was irritated. Mom, seriously, I need you to call me. Several of our accounts are showing payment failures. By the 7th, his voice had turned sharp. What the hell is going on? Did you cancel everything? Call me now. I sat on my couch, listening to my son's voice shift from confusion to anger, and felt nothing. Was I supposed to feel guilty? Maybe the old me would have. The woman who'd spent Thanksgiving alone while her turkey went cold. But that woman was gone. Before I could decide whether to call back, my phone rang again. Daniel. I answered. Mom, finally, what is going on? Why did you… I made some financial adjustments, I said calmly. Adjustments? You cut off our car insurance, Emma's college fund. Do you know how… Those were gifts I chose to give. Now I'm choosing to stop. Silence. Then, is this about Thanksgiving? Because Rebecca's family invited us, and… This is about respect, Daniel. Or the lack of it. You're being ridiculous. We've been busy, that's all. You can't just… Actually, I can. It's my money. I heard Rebecca's voice in the background, sharp and insistent. Daniel covered the phone imperfectly. I caught fragments. Manipulation. Tell her, we need… When Daniel came back, his tone had changed. Harder. Fine. If that's how you want to play it, we'll manage. But don't expect to see your grandchildren if you're going to act like this. The threat landed like he'd intended. A knife aimed straight at my greatest fear. But I thought of Patricia's office, of David Chen's promised analysis, of my new will, waiting to be written. Then I guess we all have choices to make, I said, and hung up. My phone rang immediately. I turned it off. In the silence, I heard Harold's voice in my memory. Never negotiate from fear, Ellen. Know what you're worth. I was beginning to remember. David Chen called on a Tuesday morning, 10 days after our first conversation. I was in the garden, pulling weeds that had somehow thrived through November's frost. Stubborn things that refused to die despite neglect. Mrs. Patterson, I've completed the preliminary analysis. Can we meet? His office was smaller than Patricia's, dominated by 3 computer monitors and stacks of folders with color-coded tabs. David was younger than he'd sounded on the phone, mid-30s, wearing a cardigan that made him look like a professor. He turned one monitor toward me. I'm going to show you where your money went. The spreadsheet looked like something from a foreign language, all columns and codes. But David walked me through it, row by row, translating numbers into narrative. The car insurance I'd paid? They had 2 cars, both insured. The second one, Rebecca's BMW, cost $430 monthly. My $340 had been covering Daniel's truck, while their money paid for her luxury vehicle. The educational accounts I'd funded? They'd been withdrawing from Emma's fund for qualified educational expenses. David pulled up the documentation. Private swim lessons, art classes, a summer camp that cost $3,000. All technically legal uses, but… He paused delicately. These aren't necessities. The gym membership wasn't for their local Planet Fitness. It was for an exclusive club with a $180 monthly fee. I'd been paying 2/3 of it, and the loans. Those temporary emergencies? David had cross-referenced the dates with Rebecca's Facebook posts. The $5,000 for medical bills in August happened 3 weeks before she posted photos from Napa Valley. The $3,000 for car repairs came right before they bought a boat. A boat? They have a boat? My voice came out strangled. A small one. Purchased in July for $8,500. Financed, but still. They made a down payment of $2,000 2 weeks after you gave them the car repair money. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. This wasn't struggling. This was spending my money so they could maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford while treating me like an inconvenience. I want copies of everything, I said. David printed a full report. 47 pages of evidence. I drove home with it on my passenger seat, feeling the weight of truth. That evening, I updated my will with Patricia. Daniel's inheritance dropped to the legal minimum I couldn't avoid. Everything else, the house, the remaining investments, Harold's cherished collection of woodworking tools, went to Catherine and a trust for my grandchildren that Daniel and Rebecca couldn't touch until the children turned 25. I felt powerful signing that document. Protected, but power comes with a price. Daniel showed up at my door on Thursday. Not alone. Rebecca was with him, wearing a smile that didn't match her eyes. I hadn't invited them. Hadn't even told them I was home. "Mom!" Daniel's voice carried forced cheer. "We can't just leave things like this. We need to talk." I let them in. What else could I do? They were still my son, still my grandchildren's parents. But I noticed how Rebecca's gaze swept my living room, cataloging, calculating. They sat on my couch, Harold's couch, and Daniel leaned forward with practiced concern. "Mom, I know you're upset about Thanksgiving. We should have called instead of texting. That was wrong." "This isn't about Thanksgiving," I said. Rebecca jumped in, her voice syrup sweet. "We know you've been feeling lonely. It's natural after losing Harold. Maybe we haven't been attentive enough." I hired a forensic accountant. The room went silent. Daniel's concerned expression cracked. "You what?" "I know about the boat, about Napa, about exactly where my money has been going." Rebecca's sweetness evaporated. "That's a violation of our privacy. You had no right." "I had every right. It was my money you spent." Daniel stood, his face reddening. "After everything we've done for you, visiting, calling, including you in our lives. You stopped visiting 6 months ago. The calls became monthly, then stopped. And now you're threatening to take away my grandchildren if I don't keep funding your lifestyle. That's not..." Daniel started. "I recorded our last conversation." I lied. I hadn't, but his flinch told me I'd struck nerve. "The one where you said I wouldn't see Emma and Jack unless I kept paying." Rebecca grabbed Daniel's arm. Her mask had fully dropped now. "You're making a huge mistake. We've been patient with your loneliness, your neediness. But if you want to play hardball, get out. Mom, get out of my house." They left, but not before Rebecca turned at the door. "You'll regret this. We'll make sure you never see those kids again. And when you die alone in this house, don't expect us at your funeral." The door slammed. I stood in my empty living room, shaking so hard I had to sit down. Had I just made everything worse? For 3 days, I unplugged my phone. I worked in the garden. I read books. I let myself rest because Patricia had warned me. They'll escalate before they accept defeat. You need to be ready. I rested, but I also prepared. On Sunday, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. Thick, cream-colored paper. Expensive. Inside, a handwritten card from Rebecca. "Dear Ellen, I've been reflecting on our conversation. and I realize we've all been under tremendous stress. I'd like to invite you to Emma's winter recital this Friday at 6 p.m. She's been asking about you. Maybe we can start fresh. Love, Rebecca. Underneath, in Emma's wobbly 7-year-old handwriting, Grandma. Please come, I miss you. My hand trembled, holding that card. Emma's words, real or dictated. The hook was perfectly baited. My granddaughter, asking for me. What kind of grandmother would refuse? But I thought about the forensic report sitting in my drawer, about the boat bought with money I'd given for car repairs, about Rebecca's parting threat at my door. This wasn't an olive branch. This was a test. I called Patricia. They're trying to reel me back in. Don't respond yet. Let them wonder. Silence is more powerful than they expect. So I waited. The silence felt unnatural, like holding my breath underwater, but I held it. 2 days later, Daniel called. I let it go to voicemail. Mom, did you get Rebecca's invitation? The kids really want to see you. We all do. Maybe we overreacted the other day. Can we please just talk? His voice sounded sincere. Almost broke me. But then I remembered. Daniel had learned sincerity from me. He knew exactly which buttons to push. I didn't call back. Friday came, Emma's recital day. I spent it at the library, volunteering my usual shift. Anything to stay busy, to not imagine my granddaughter scanning the audience for a grandmother who wasn't there. But when I got home, I found myself crying in Harold's chair. Was I being cruel? Was I punishing my grandchildren for their parents' mistakes? The doorbell rang at 8 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw Margaret Chen, David's mother, and my friend from book club. I'd mentioned none of this to her, too ashamed to admit my son was financially bleeding me dry. I opened the door. Margaret held a casserole dish and a bottle of wine. I'm invading, she announced, pushing past me into the kitchen. David told me what's happening. Before you get mad at him, he was worried about you. And I'm worried about you. Have you eaten? I hadn't. She heated the casserole, chicken and rice, comfort food, and poured 2 glasses of wine. We sat at my kitchen table, and for the first time in weeks, I told someone the whole story. Not the lawyer, not the accountant, a friend. Margaret listened, occasionally refilling my wine, until I'd emptied myself of words. Then she said, "You did the right thing." I missed Emma's recital. Ellen, listen to me. I raised 4 children. I know manipulation when I see it. They're using those babies as leverage because they know it's your weakness. But you can't negotiate with people who see your love as a tool. What if they really do keep the kids from me? Then they're proving you right about who they are. And Ellen? Those children will grow up. They'll ask questions. They'll remember the grandmother who loved them, and they'll wonder why they couldn't see her. Truth has a way of surfacing. She stayed until midnight, talking about everything and nothing. When she left, she hugged me tight. You're not alone in this. Call me. Anytime. The next morning, I woke to find Margaret had organized a support system I hadn't known I needed. My book club showed up with breakfast. All 6 women, armed with muffins and coffee and fierce loyalty. Janet, who'd been widowed 3 years before me, squeezed my hand. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up. They'd all dealt with difficult children, grasping relatives, loneliness that tried to make them settle for scraps of affection. They understood. What do you need? Asked Susan, always practical. Honestly? I need to know I'm not crazy, that I'm not being a vindictive old woman. You're being a woman who knows her worth, Margaret said firmly. And you're teaching your son a lesson he should have learned 30 years ago. That week, I rejoined my life. Book club, library. I even signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. Something I'd wanted to do for years but never had time for. Funny how I suddenly had time now that I wasn't waiting by the phone for crumbs of attention. Daniel and Rebecca stayed quiet, watching, waiting. I could feel them circling, looking for weakness. But I wasn't alone anymore, and I wasn't weak. I was ready. They came on a Wednesday afternoon, 2 weeks before Christmas. I was painting, badly but enthusiastically, when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Daniel's truck. Both of them stood on my porch, and between them, Emma and Jack. My heart lurched. The children. They'd brought the children. Emma wore her pink winter coat. Jack clutched a stuffed dinosaur. They looked cold. I had no choice. I opened the door. "Surprise, Grandma." Emma's voice was bright, rehearsed. She hugged my legs before I could process what was happening. Jack followed, shy but warm. The weight of them, the smell of their shampoo. It hit me like a wave. "We thought it was time to clear the air," Daniel said, stepping inside without invitation. Rebecca followed, carrying a pie. Store-bought, I noticed, not even the effort of homemade. "The kids have been asking about you nonstop," Rebecca added, her smile perfect and empty. We realized we've all been stubborn. Family is too important for this silliness. Silliness. My missing thousands of dollars and their threats were silliness. But Emma was showing me a drawing she'd made at school, a house with a big sun and stick figures labeled Grandma, me, Jack. How could I focus on anger when my granddaughter's small hand was in mine? "Why don't you two play in the living room?" I suggested gently. "I have your toy box in the closet." Once the children were occupied, Daniel and Rebecca sat at my kitchen table. The same table where Margaret and my book club had rallied around me last week. The contrast felt obscene. "Mom," Daniel began, his voice reasonable, measured. "We know you were hurt. We haven't been as attentive as we should be. But this legal stuff, the accountant, the lawyer, it's gone too far." "You hired people to investigate us," Rebecca added, her voice wounded. "Your own family. Do you know how that feels? Do you know how it feels to discover your son bought a boat with money he said was for car repairs?" Daniel flinched. "That was bad timing. We were going to tell you—" "When? When were you going to tell me you've been using me as your personal bank while cutting me out of your lives?" Rebecca's mask slipped. Just for a second, I saw the calculation in her eyes. Then she rearranged her face into hurt. "We never meant to make you feel used. You offered to help. We thought you wanted to. I wanted to help my family, not finance a lifestyle you couldn't afford while being told I matter less than your in-laws." That text was taken out of context. What context makes "they matter more to us" acceptable? Silence. In the living room, Emma laughed at something Jack said. The sound felt like a knife. Daniel tried a different approach. "Look, we're willing to forget all this. The investigation, the lawyers, the money. Let's just move forward. The kids need their grandmother. We can set up a regular visitation schedule, maybe every other Sunday." Visitation schedule? The word tasted like poison. Like I'm a divorced parent being granted access to my own grandchildren? "We're trying to meet you halfway," Rebecca said, her voice hardening. "But if you keep this up, the financial vindictiveness, the legal threats, you're forcing our hand. We can't expose Emma and Jack to someone who's become so unstable." Unstable. There it was. The real play. "Are you threatening to claim I'm mentally incompetent?" "We're saying that your recent behavior raises concerns," Daniel said carefully. "Cutting us off financially without warning, hiring investigators, these paranoid accusations." Paranoid? I have 47 pages of documented evidence showing exactly where my money went. Rebecca stood abruptly. "This is pointless. She's not listening to reason. Mom, please. Daniel's voice cracked, and for a moment I saw my little boy, the one I'd raised. Don't you want to be part of their lives? Don't you want Christmas morning with Emma and Jack? We're offering you that. All you have to do is drop this legal nonsense and go back to how things were. How things were. Me paying while they took. Me grateful for scraps while they lived high. From the living room, Emma called out, "Grandma, come see what we built." I looked at my son, at his wife with her cold eyes and calculated smile. They thought they had me cornered. My love for those children against my dignity. "Get out," I said quietly. "Mom, take your children and get out of my house. If you want me in their lives, you'll treat me with respect. Not as a wallet, not as someone you can manipulate, as their grandmother who loves them." Rebecca grabbed her purse. "Fine, but don't come crying to us when you're alone every holiday. Don't expect to be at birthdays or school events. You're choosing this." "No," I said, meeting her eyes. "You chose this when you decided I was too weak to fight back." Daniel's face went red. "We tried to be nice. We tried to reconcile. But if you want war, I don't want war. I want basic human decency. Apparently, that's too much to ask." They gathered the children with sharp efficiency. Emma's face crumpled. "But we just got here." "Grandma's not feeling well, sweetie," Rebecca said sweetly, shooting me a venomous look. The door slammed. I stood in my kitchen, shaking. Fear crept in cold and sharp. What if they really did erase me from those children's lives? What if I never saw them grow up? But underneath the fear, something harder crystallized. They'd come to break me, to force surrender. They'd used my grandchildren as weapons, and they'd failed. I called Patricia. They just tried to get me to drop everything in exchange for visitation rights to my own grandchildren, document everything that was said, record dates, times, witnesses if possible. They threatened to claim I'm mentally unstable. Let them try. We have documentation proving you're perfectly competent. Ellen, they're desperate. That's why they're escalating. Desperate people make mistakes. I was counting on it. The showdown came not at my choosing, but at theirs. A miscalculation that cost them everything. It started with a letter from their attorney. Daniel and Rebecca had filed for grandparents' rights restrictions, claiming I posed an emotional and financial threat to the children's well-being. The hearing was set for January 12th. Patricia read the filing in her office, her expression darkening. "They're alleging you're experiencing age-related cognitive decline and financial irresponsibility. They claim you've made threats and displayed erratic behavior." My hands went cold. Can they do this? They can file anything, proving it is different. She looked up. "Ellen, they're going to claim you're not competent, which means we need to prove not only that you are, but that they're the ones who've been behaving unethically. Are you ready for that?" I thought of Emma's face as they dragged her from my house, of Harold's life insurance money spent on boats and wine country trips, of that Thanksgiving text message. "I'm ready." The courthouse on January 12th was smaller than I expected. I arrived with Patricia and Margaret, who'd insisted on coming for moral support and to stare them down if needed. David Chen sat behind us with his briefcase full of evidence. Daniel and Rebecca entered with their lawyer, a sharp-featured woman named Ms. Hartwick, who looked like she could argue convincingly that the sky was green. They didn't look at me. Rebecca wore pearls and a conservative dress. Daniel had a fresh haircut. They looked like pillars of the community. Judge Brennan, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and no-nonsense eyes, called the hearing to order. Ms. Hartwick stood. "Your Honor, my clients are concerned about Mrs. Ellen Patterson's recent behavior and its impact on her grandchildren. Over the past 3 months, she has exhibited financial irresponsibility, erratic decision-making, and has made threats regarding their access to their children." She painted a picture of a lonely, declining widow who'd become unstable after her husband's death, who'd promised financial support, then vindictively withdrawn it, who'd hired investigators to harass her family, who'd refused reasonable attempts at reconciliation. My clients have tried to maintain a relationship, Ms. Hartwick continued, but Mrs. Patterson's increasingly paranoid and unstable behavior has forced them to take protective measures. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded. Patricia had coached me. Let them dig their hole. Judge Brennan turned to Patricia. Response? Patricia stood with the calm of someone holding a royal flush. Your Honor, may I present the actual financial records? She distributed copies to the judge and opposing counsel. David's 47-page report. Every transfer. Every loan request and broken promise. Every automatic payment I'd covered, while Daniel and Rebecca bought boats and took vacations. Ms. Hartwick's confident expression flickered. Your Honor, Patricia continued, Mrs. Patterson didn't withdraw support vindictively. She stopped being exploited. Over 18 months, she gave her son and daughter-in-law nearly $40,000 while they systematically reduced contact with her. When she asked for basic respect and honesty, they threatened to prevent her from seeing her grandchildren. She played the recording. I'd thought I was lying when I'd told Daniel I recorded our call, but Patricia had suggested I actually do it going forward. So when Rebecca called 2 days after their visit to my house, I'd recorded it. Rebecca's voice filled the courtroom. You're making a huge mistake, Ellen. If you don't drop this legal nonsense, you'll never see Emma and Jack again. We'll make sure of it. And when you die alone, don't expect us at your funeral. The judge's expression hardened. Daniel stood suddenly. That's out of context. She was— Sit down, Mr. Patterson, Judge Brennan said sharply. Patricia wasn't finished. She presented the text message from Thanksgiving. The Facebook posts cross-referenced with loan requests. Rebecca's invitation to Emma's recital. The same recital I'd been excluded from for months until they needed leverage. Ms. Hartwick tried to recover. Your Honor, family disputes are complicated. My clients may have communicated poorly, but that doesn't negate concerns about Mrs. Patterson's competency. What evidence do you have of incompetency? The judge interrupted. Ms. Hartwick faltered. Well, the sudden financial decisions. You mean the decision to stop funding her son's luxury lifestyle after discovering he'd lied about why he needed the money? The hiring of investigators to harass. You mean the hiring of a forensic accountant to track where her own money went? That's harassment? Daniel's face had gone from red to white. Rebecca stared at the table, her jaw clenched. Judge Brennan looked at the documents before her, then at Daniel and Rebecca. Let me be crystal clear. I see no evidence of cognitive decline in Mrs. Patterson. I see a woman who discovered she was being financially exploited and took reasonable steps to protect herself. What I do see is a son and daughter-in-law who made financial demands, received substantial support, then threatened to withhold access to grandchildren when that support was withdrawn. She turned to Ms. Hartwick. Your petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm ordering family mediation, and if your clients refuse to participate in good faith, I'll consider Mrs. Patterson's counter-petition for structured grandparent access. Do you understand? The silence was deafening. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca grabbed Daniel's arm, hissing something I couldn't hear. He looked broken, lost. They'd come to paint me as incompetent. Instead, they'd revealed exactly who they were. Patricia squeezed my shoulder. You did it, but I didn't feel victorious yet. This was exposure, not resolution. That would come next. The mediation session was scheduled for 2 weeks later. They had no choice but to attend. Judge Brennan had made that clear. Refusal would result in court-ordered grandparent access, something Rebecca had fought desperately to prevent. I arrived at the mediator's office with clarity I hadn't felt in months. Patricia sat beside me. Across the table, Daniel and Rebecca looked diminished somehow, like plants deprived of water. Ms. Hartwick hadn't returned. They'd come with a different lawyer, a tired-looking man named Mr. Foster, who had the air of someone cleaning up someone else's mess. The mediator, Dr. Sandra Walsh, was a clinical psychologist who specialized in family conflicts. She had kind eyes but a firm voice. We're here to establish healthy boundaries and, if possible, repair family relationships. Let's begin with Mrs. Patterson. What are your goals for this mediation? I'd practiced this with Patricia. Keep it simple. Keep it honest. I want a genuine relationship with my grandchildren. Not supervised visits granted as favors. Not access traded for money. I want my son and daughter-in-law to treat me with basic respect. And I want accountability for the money they took under false pretenses. Rebecca started to speak, but Dr. Walsh held up a hand. You'll have your turn. Mrs. Patterson, can you elaborate on accountability? I don't expect full repayment, I said, watching Daniel's shoulders relax slightly. Then I continued. But I do expect acknowledgement. A written admission that they misrepresented their financial needs and a formal repayment plan for at least the direct loans, the $24,700. Even if it's $20 a month for the rest of my life, I need them to acknowledge what they did. That's extortion, Rebecca burst out. Dr. Walsh's gaze sharpened. Mrs. Patterson is asking for accountability for documented loans. That's not extortion. That's reasonable. Mr. Foster whispered urgently to his clients. Daniel looked sick. Let me be direct, I continued, my voice steady. I've already updated my will. Daniel's inheritance is now the minimum required by law. Everything else, my house, my remaining investments, my husband's possessions, goes to my daughter Catherine, and a trust for Emma and Jack that their parents cannot access until the children turn 25. Rebecca's face went white. You can't. I already did. The will is filed, legal, uncontestable unless you want to claim I'm incompetent again, which didn't go well last time. Dr. Walsh made notes. And what would it take for you to reconsider this will? Years, I said simply. Years of genuine relationship. Years of them proving they value me as a person, not a resource. And complete transparency about their finances. I want to see that they're living within their means, not waiting for me to die so they can inherit. The room fell silent. This is vindictive, Rebecca started. This is consequence, I interrupted. You told me your in-laws mattered more than me. You used my grandchildren as bargaining chips. You tried to have me declared incompetent in court. Those aren't mistakes. Those are choices. Choices have consequences. Daniel finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Mom, I'm sorry. I know I messed up. But this is so extreme. Extreme? You took $40,000 from me. You lied about emergencies while buying boats. You threatened to erase me from my grandchildren's lives if I didn't keep paying. What exactly is extreme about protecting myself from that? Mr. Foster cleared his throat. My clients are prepared to offer regular visitation. No, Patricia interjected. That's not acceptable. Mrs. Patterson isn't asking for visitation to be granted. She's a grandmother. She has rights that the court has acknowledged. What we're negotiating is whether she exercises those rights through legal channels or through voluntary family cooperation. The implication hung heavy. Cooperate or face court orders. Dr. Walsh looked at Daniel and Rebecca. What are you willing to commit to? They huddled with their lawyer. Minutes passed. I watched them whisper furiously, Rebecca's face growing more pinched with each passing second. She kept shaking her head, but Mr. Foster seemed to be explaining something that was making her resistance crumble. Daniel's hands were clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. Finally, Daniel spoke. Weekly visits with the kids, supervised at first? No, I said firmly. Unsupervised. I'm not a threat, and you know it. Every Sunday, 1 to 5 p.m. Major holidays alternate with Catherine's family, and Emma and Jack stay with me one weekend per month. Rebecca looked like she'd been slapped. 1 weekend a month? That's what grandparents typically do, Dr. Walsh interjected calmly. It's well within normal family arrangements. And the money? Mr. Foster asked quietly. Written acknowledgement of the debt. Repayment plan of $200 monthly. It'll take 9 years, but that's fine. It's about principle, not speed. More whispered consultation. Rebecca's face was stone, but I could see her jaw working, grinding her teeth. Daniel looked between his wife and his lawyer, then at me. For just a moment, I saw the boy I'd raised, the one who'd scraped his knee and run me for comfort, who'd cried on my shoulder after his first heartbreak. That boy knew he'd done wrong, but he'd let himself become someone else. Fine, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. We agree. Dr. Walsh prepared the agreement. They signed it. Legal, binding, enforceable. As we left, Rebecca grabbed my arm in the parking lot. Her fingers dug in harder than necessary. You've destroyed this family. I met her eyes, not flinching from her grip. No, I saved myself from people who were destroying me. There's a difference. She let go as if I'd burned her. That night, Catherine called from Oregon. I'd told her everything weeks ago. Mom, I'm so proud of you. I just protected myself. You did more than that. You showed them they can't abuse kindness. That's important. Sunday came. Daniel brought Emma and Jack at exactly 1 p.m. The kids ran to me, genuine in a way their parents couldn't fake. We baked cookies, read stories, built a fort from couch cushions. At 4:55 p.m., Emma hugged me tight. Will we come back next week, Grandma? Every week, sweetheart. Every single week. Daniel looked hollow, watching his children love me. Rebecca stayed in the car, staring straight ahead through the windshield. The first $200 payment hit my account the following Tuesday. I didn't need the money. I needed the admission. I needed the victory. And I had it. 6 months passed, and my life transformed in ways I hadn't imagined possible. The Sundays with Emma and Jack became sacred. We had rituals now. Pancakes for lunch, garden time in good weather, art projects that left my kitchen table gloriously messy. The children knew my house as a safe haven, a place where they could be loud and creative and loved without condition. Emma had started calling me every Wednesday evening, her idea, not mandated by any agreement. She'd tell me about school, about her friends, about the books she was reading. Sometimes Jack would grab the phone and babble about dinosaurs or whatever had captured his 4-year-old imagination that week. These calls, unscheduled and spontaneous, meant more than any court order ever could. Catherine visited for 2 weeks in spring, bringing her husband, Tom, and their daughter, Lily. The house filled with laughter, with family who chose to be there. Catherine and I stayed up late one night, drinking wine on the porch Harold had built. You're different, Mom, she said. Stronger somehow. I remembered my worth, I replied simply. My watercolor class had evolved into genuine friendship with 3 other women. We met for coffee between sessions, went to art galleries, planned a weekend trip to Charleston. I'd joined a hiking group that met Saturday mornings. Nothing strenuous, just gentle trails and good company. The library promoted me to lead volunteer coordinator. Margaret and I had become inseparable. She introduced me to her book club, different from my old one, focused on mysteries and thrillers. I introduced her to my hiking group. Our lives braided together in the comfortable way of women who'd survived their own battles and had wisdom to share. I'd even started dating. Nothing serious. Coffee with Robert, a retired teacher I'd met at the library. Dinner occasionally with Frank, a widower from church. It felt strange at first, disloyal to Harold's memory. But I could almost hear Harold laughing, telling me not to be ridiculous, telling me to live. My bank account had stabilized. The financial bleeding had stopped. I'd even started a small investment account for myself, something frivolous, Patricia called it. Travel money. For cruises I might actually take now, for trips to see Catherine, for whatever adventures I decided I deserved. But while my life bloomed, Daniel and Rebecca's life was unraveling. It started small. The boat they'd bought with my money, repossessed in March. Turns out luxury items on credit become difficult when you can't use someone else's money for payments. Rebecca's BMW, the one I'd unknowingly helped maintain, was traded for a used Honda Accord. I heard this from Emma during one of our calls. Mommy was really upset about the new car, she'd said innocently. She cried. The country club membership lapsed. I knew because Daniel mentioned it during one awkward pickup, his voice tight with resentment. Had to make some lifestyle adjustments. I said nothing. What was there to say? By summer, they'd put their house on the market. The 4-bedroom colonial in the nice neighborhood, the one they'd stretched to afford. They moved to a smaller rental across town. Rebecca's Facebook posts, which I occasionally checked through a fake account Margaret had helped me create, stopped being about wine tastings and weekend getaways. They just stopped. Daniel's job situation became precarious. I learned through Emma that he'd been really tired and grumpy because he was working extra hours. The raise he'd expected didn't materialize. His boss had apparently questioned some expense reports, a detail that made me wonder what other corners Daniel had been cutting. Rebecca got a job, her first in years. Retail management at a department store. The woman who'd once posted photos of herself at expensive brunches now worked evenings and weekends. Emma mentioned that Mommy doesn't like her new job very much. The twice-monthly payments into my account arrived like clockwork, but they'd requested a reduction from $200 to $150. Patricia advised me to accept. "You've made your point," she said. We restructured to 12 years instead of 9. I didn't mind. The payment amount was never the point. What struck me most was how quickly their facade crumbled once my money disappeared. All that lifestyle, that image of success, it had been built on my generosity, mistaken for weakness. Without that foundation, the whole structure collapsed. At Emma's 8th birthday party in June, held at their rental, modest and simple, I watched Rebecca navigate a celebration she'd clearly planned on a tight budget. Store-bought cake instead of custom. Party at home instead of an expensive venue. Emma didn't care. She was happy, surrounded by friends and family. But Rebecca looked diminished. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by outlet store basics. The expensive highlights in her hair had grown out to her natural mousy brown. She looked tired in a way that makeup couldn't hide. Daniel had aged 5 years in 6 months, gray at his temples, lines around his eyes. When he looked at me, I saw something I'd never expected. Shame. Good. During Emma's cake cutting, Rebecca pulled me aside. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual edge. "I suppose you're happy, seeing us like this?" I met her eyes. "I'm not happy you're struggling. I'm happy I'm not funding struggles you pretended didn't exist while treating me like I was disposable. We're losing everything." "No. You're losing what you could never afford in the first place. What you built using my money while pushing me away. That's not losing everything. That's facing reality." She walked away without another word. That evening, driving home with a slice of birthday cake Emma had insisted I take, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not vindictive satisfaction, though there was some of that, but genuine peace. I'd stopped being a victim, and my life had become my own again.